All right. Hello, my name's Peter Sherman, and I'm the Executive Director of Global Scholars Canada, and it's my privilege to welcome you to this webinar entitled Reading, Writing, Arithmetic, and Religion, or the fourth R, Religious Literacy and Why It's Imperative for Our Polarized World. I hope everybody understands that we don't have a problem with spelling here. When we say the fourth R, reading, writing, arithmetic, it's an old saying. And when we say the fourth R, we're saying religion should be one of the basic parts of human education. And that's the argument tonight, based on a book by Leo van Arragon, which I wrote the foreword to, entitled Reflections on Religious Literacy, Paradox, Promise, and Politics in a Secular Age. I think it's a really important topic for us today. And if you watch the news, like right now, James Tallarico is making very, very big news in Texas as he runs for the US Senate and speaking constantly about his Christian faith as a Democrat, which is incredible. And it's important that we understand religion in order to understand the news. And we're going to talk a bit about that today with Leo helping us. Um, I want to say a few words about Global Scholars Canada, the host tonight. The next slide tells us that, in a nutshell, the mission of Global Scholars Canada is, well, Christian professors without borders. That means our goal is to send and equip Christian professors so that they can bring their faith to bear in whatever discipline they teach and serve in global higher education, specifically and primarily in underserved areas of the globe. John, could you forward? So there's our mission. And what do? We send Christian scholars of all disciplines through travel and through electronic media to underserved areas of the globe. What else do we do? There's three things. We also support students, and we do that in any discipline. Specifically, right now, we focus on a Gambian scholarship program that allows Christian students in this primarily Muslim country to get a degree in Christian religious studies. And we help pay their tuition there. And finally, what we do is we share events and resources like this one. One of our principal partners is Global Scholars USA. And our primary global partner is the Society of Christian Scholars, where I serve on the executive committee. And we have our very first, it's a young organization, our very first global conference in Kenya this August. If you want to hear more about that, feel free to email me. The last slide I wanted to share with you is a little introduction to our speakers today. Of course, we have Leo van Arragon featured, the author of the book. And then we have this panel of three persons. And I'm gonna say more about them just before they talk as we go through the panel. But this is the order: Dr. Brian Caruana from Encounter World Religions, and then Trevor Carlson, who's a PhD candidate at the Institute for Christian Studies, and then Margie Patrick, a professor of education at the King's University. And we're going to go about 75 minutes, and the outline is kind of this. We're going to go through the panelists after hearing from Leo, and then we're going to go back to Leo, and then back through the panelists a second time, and then we're going to open up to questions from anybody on this webinar, and then we're going to give our panelists and then finally Leo the last word, and we hope to be done at 8:15 in Eastern Time. So about 75 minutes wherever you are. All right, some might be asking, why is Global Scholars Canada interested in this? Well, we have this book where we have a Christian thinking about the pluralistic, secular environment of higher education. And he's got this book that has global examples in it, explaining the need for teaching, learning, writing, and dialoguing about religion in schools. And that's really important to us at Global Scholars. And he does this for the sake of the common good, locally and globally. And he's trying to find this position that's not sectarian, but neither is it secular. It's more of a pluralistic orientation for education at all levels. So why don't we transition to hear from Leo himself? Leo calls himself an independent scholar at this point. He's had 37 years as an educator and administrator. He was a Christian school principal in Ottawa for many years. He's been involved in curriculum development. And what's interesting about Leo is that he retired in his 60s and then decided it might be a good time to start a PhD. And so he did that at the University of Ottawa in religious studies and studied under Laurie Beeman. Laurie Beeman, just her name just escaped me. So part of what is in the book was in his PhD. And I said to Leo, we should have a big book launch. We should have cake. We should celebrate this and have speakers and you could do a reading, with coffee and well, this is the best we've got right now. And I said we should do more events. And he said, well, my thoughts are moving on already to new things. So Leo, tell us about what your thoughts were and let's see what kind of conversation we can have. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Peter. I'll be reading my notes, so if I seem a little distracted, I'm looking at my notes here because I am so distractible, so I got to stay on track here. All right. Thank you, Peter, and it's good to see everybody. Thanks for joining us for this. My area of research is the role and management of religion in state-funded public education systems that identify themselves as secular. The conundrum is that religion is ubiquitous in our world, and liberal societies like to pride themselves on protections of religious freedoms. At the same time, in a modern secular age, religion is an awkward presence, a kind of anachronism we associate with an earlier time in our histories, defined in terms of quaint practices and beliefs. In a secular model, some of us are religious and some of us are not. And although in a liberal society we have to respect choice, we don't have to take choices to be religious, or we don't have to take religious people all that seriously. One way we manage religion is by imagining a world divided between the religious and the secular, with religion consigned to private spaces and public spaces being defined as secular. However, the world has never operated in the tidy, theoretical ways we would like it to, and education systems have had to struggle with the role of religion, which keeps showing up in public spaces. However, because education is seen as secular, religion is never a comfortable presence. For a variety of reasons, it has remained on the margins of educational respectability, becoming more of a management problem rather than a full-fledged knowledge partner in the generation of public wisdom. The book addresses the marginalization of religion, advocating for religion and religious literacy as full-fledged partners in education. Now, to make the case, I revisit the concept of secularism and the common definitions of religion. First, I think the concept of the secular has outlived its usefulness in our history, and now it gets in the way of our thinking our way through the conundrums of religion and modernity. Second, the common definitions of religion focus on beliefs and practices while avoiding sufficient attention to the human capacity which they embody. That allows us to think of some of us as religious and others not religious. However, that misses some important anthropological, epistemological, and experiential factors. Religion involves beliefs and practices, but they embody a universal capacity to reach for transcendence as a source of permanence, orienting us in time and space. We live in time and space, and we are all driven to wonder about our destiny and the meaning of our journeys. Our students come to us with that capacity, and we do them a disservice if we pretend that their wondering about the big questions of life are private matters which we cannot engage in education. In fact, all education is animated by a preferred graduate profile toward which we guide our students and which cause us sleepless nights at times. In short, we are all religious and all education is faith based, something the language of secularism misses. So, two gifts of religious literacy. One, it equips students to engage the religious problematics of their everyday worlds. I'm borrowing that from Dorothy Smith. You may be familiar with her. By that, I mean that the products and practices in their everyday lives and everyday worlds embody ultimate values and commitments. Good critical religious thinking equips our students to trace the evidence they see every day to the ultimate values and commitments animating their worlds. In short, their athletic shoes, the design of the cities in which they live, land use, political systems, economic systems are not random, but rather tell a story about human meaning and destiny. Education systems equip students to read the story told by their worlds. Second, students are on a spirit quest, and education equips them to engage their lives more intelligently and meaningfully. Education equips them to become better people, engaging their worlds with a moral purpose. Like their worlds, their lives are not random, but they tell a story. Educators equip them to tell a better story with and about their lives. In short, we need to be transparent and honest about the ultimate purposes, commitments, and values to which we would like our students to commit themselves and which our education systems embody. And that's the essential task of religious literacy. So the religious and secular binary does not work in this situation. And so that's about all I'll say for now.
All right. I think when we talked earlier, Leo, you said it bumps up against reality, this secular ideological perspective that compartmentalizes religion to the private sphere.
Right.
And
Yep.
reality means the lives of people in everyday life.
Yeah, and their journeys through time. Yeah. Okay, I'll
Yeah.
stop talking here.
Okay. Thanks, Leo. Thanks for your
Yep.
book, and thanks for being part of this today. Brian Caruana is the executive director of Encounter World Religions in Guelph, Ontario, and it does a lot of work in the Greater Toronto area. He teaches religious literacy in schools, workplaces, and in the general public. He does what we talk about today is something that Brian does every day. He has a PhD in religious studies from the University of Toronto, which is focused on evangelical lobby groups in Ottawa. It's a very interesting study. And if you want to really read some good commentary on religion today, Brian is the religions geek, and you can read his columns. He has webinars. He's on podcasts with CBC. He's very well known in the GTA at religionsgeek.com. Brian, what's the problem today, and how is Leo's book sitting with you?
Well, thanks for that kind introduction, Peter. Um, Leo, first, I just want to say how much I enjoyed your book. Your critique of the current systems in particular was so exceptional. At times, you were critiquing things I did in ways that I found quite humbling. I just really enjoyed your book. I do have some potentially challenging questions, but I hope, Leo, that they are received as somebody who found your book very provocative. I don't think anyone will be able to touch this topic in Canada again without looking at your book, or at least I would tell them not to. Um, Wise commentators on politics often emphasize that politics is about trade-offs, right? You want to tax the rich, but there'll be a trade-off. Some people will take their businesses or their medical practice south of the border. Or if you want to cut taxes to bring them back, you'll have to cut some programs. There's always trade-offs. And I want to consider that here. In 1950 in Canada, there was a kind of Christian consensus. It allowed public institutions like schools to promote Christian morality using shared stories and moral content, but there was a trade-off. It wasn't so great if you were a Jew. It wasn't so great if you were Indigenous, and it wasn't so great if you were an atheist. You presumably weren't even trustworthy. The rise of secular perspectives then created different trade-offs. Life improved for Jews, for non-believers, and for minority religions, but some of that shared moral content was lost, and further, if you belong to a strong Christian community, as I suspect maybe everybody else on this call does, there was some loss for your community, and that's not fun. My question to you, Leo, is your proposal, what do you think are the trade-offs that it creates? I tried to take a shot at this. I agree, to be clear, about the desire for religious literacy for everybody else's perspective. Leo, you take a different view than some of the more common ones about let's just educate people about religions, and that you want a kind of thicker engagement with the moral questions, a kind of examination. And for me, one potential trade-off of that, I think, might be a form of conflict in the classroom that I wasn't. I wonder if schools will be able to deal with them. I don't think this is because religions are inherently violent. I've never bought that argument, but because they are deeply held. Like you, I agree that religions matter politically. They always have. And in school, we definitely talk about political things, but mostly where the dominant narrative has a kind of consensus. The consensus is sometimes forced, but we will say things in school like you shouldn't discriminate against gay people and residential schools were terrible. Conversely, we don't typically address something like party politics in schools very much because there's not enough consensus to have a kind of shared approved curriculum. So, what would we do in school with the student who's committed to Hindutva, a popular stance amongst some Hindus that at some level leads to discrimination against Muslims and other minorities? What about the view on caste? How would one tackle a Jewish and Muslim students' disagreement about Israel and Palestine? And to be clear, I think some schools do address this today, but I think they honestly shouldn't be so much. I think they're introducing partisan perspectives into a public institution and addressing an issue that I think many of them probably don't know that well. And what about views of gender that might conflict with a particular take on Sharia or again on caste? These conflicts may exist now at some level in the classroom because we do affirm gender equality, where we have, again, a shared consensus, but we don't highlight the conflict with religious convictions explicitly. And so I'm wondering, should we? And if so, how? And this is a particularly big one in my estimation. What will parents think? Will they stand for the religious convictions they teach at home being scrutinized in a class led by a public school teacher? My guess is that many devout parents would not. Schools that do dive deeply into religion always, as far as I'm aware, do so from a shared religious perspective. It's a Muslim private school, a Jewish day school. The kind of open critical examination of religion we leave for university, partly because the students are now adults and can decide for themselves. I think one possible response, which you hinted at already, is from your work, is the idea that we are already teaching religion anyway because everyone is religious. And here I would need another 5 minutes to make my case, but I don't have that. So I'll say simply, my understanding is that religion becomes any ultimate concern, which might be devotion to one's family, for example, if I've understood you correctly on that. And all I can say quickly is I'm unconvinced, I guess, that devotion to one's family and being Muslim belong in the same category. And maybe at the end of the day, who cares what Brian thinks? But I don't think parents will feel that those things belong in the same category either. I don't think they will. And I think folks will perceive this as a significant shift if that equivalence doesn't hold, and that the classroom challenges that I've mentioned might still therefore persist. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. That's a provocative contribution, and we need these tough questions. I think you picked on a lot of really serious issues that would be controversial. I don't know if that pertains to much of what would be taught. We'll see what our other panelists think. Trevor Carlson is a PhD candidate in philosophy, and he's at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto, although his PhD will be granted by the Free University in Amsterdam. He's studying, quote, spiritual exercises of embodied transformation into conversations with a critical pedagogy. So, very interesting. Embodied transformation and a critical pedagogy. He'll be publishing something soon on the topic of bodies in intellectual diversity. And he's a philosopher himself. He's also been an educator, and he's concerned about justice and education. Trevor, thank you for joining us today. Go ahead.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, so as Peter mentioned, I was a secondary teacher. I taught middle school literature and high school algebra. And what I'm interested in my research is how these little things we do in school add up and shape us. And Leo worded it in a great way that these little steps we take, how we walk through the hallway, how we greet each other or don't greet each other, all these things can add up to, as the person he quoted said, a whole cosmology or a whole way of looking and inhabiting the world. And so that's what I'm interested in my research. And to that point, I really want to bring this conversation down to, for an interest of what might teachers get from this? What does this have to do for the classroom? And there's one thing that Leo brings up very early that's an experience that every secondary teacher or every teacher, regardless of level, will have, perhaps less in higher education, but is the question of why do we have to learn this? Like when I was teaching Gustav Freitag's plot pyramid, and my students are thinking about their shifts later they have at work or whatnot, and why do I have to know Freitag's plot pyramid? What does that have to do with my life? Um, and I think, and basically in a certain way, I think Leo's book, although perhaps a little too much for a middle schooler, is a long answer to that question of why do we have to learn this? And I think his discussion about religion then points out a problem, then why this question might fall flat. He brings up that, sort of the imagined teacher, with stacks of paperworks and parent emails to deal with says, you have to take this stuff because I have a family to support, right? Or you have to learn this because you have to, right? It's the state requires it, or the province requires it, so on and so forth, right? But what Leo's pointing us to is that there's actually, and I want to divide this problem into two parts: the what and the how. And this is the what question. That religion is not just something we do when we go to our communities of institutionalized religion, mosque, synagogue, coven, church, any sort of type of community, right? That it's actually sort of, you can think of religion as a fundamental level. And I'd like to think of it in terms of like the game that toddlers like to play that we give them with the wooden blocks and then the holes in the board, and you have to put the triangle in the triangle hole and the oval in the oval hole, right? Religion, just like smell and sight, can be those holes. And there's things in the world that go into those spaces if we're the block. And so what Leo is saying is that religion is actually, when we go to those communities, we get trained in how to receive those structures or those shapes. But if we're lacking that, then it's hard for us to pick up on those things, even if somebody throws an oval shaped block at me, I'm still going to feel it, even if I didn't see where it came from, and I'll be shocked and perhaps a little hurt. So Leo is saying that when this question of why do we have to learn this, falls flat, when it doesn't fit into this bigger picture, it's showing that there's a lack of this ability to connect with what is acting upon us in this bigger way. And he says for Ontario, this is togetherness, right? In Ontario public schools, that there's this bigger value, but this connection of the bigger value isn't really made with these practices that train us to see how this fits into the world. And so the value for teachers in doing things, the practices that help us see that, or train us for this sense, is that then we can notice where togetherness fits in, why plot structure has to help us with operating in society or welcoming the guests. And that gets me to the next thing. As I wrap up this portion, we can also see this problem in education becoming more of a means to an end, or more technical. So when I give a student an assignment in my algebra class that's just putting out, fill out this problem with an answer, the product is the thing that's the most important there, right? And what I'm telling them is the person that I want you to become in this world is a person who is efficient and productive, right, as a member of society. And if I'm a teacher and I'm not looking toward, right, if I'm getting this thing and I'm thinking about how to assess students, if I'm not cultivating these sensibilities of how, even how I design my assignment or my assessment on the type of person that they're going to become, then I can contribute to this, what he calls a malaise, this inability or this lack to receive those specific shapes, things that connect to the bigger picture. So there's the how, which is connecting to the bigger picture, and then the what, where we receive those things and makes us become a person that fits in with that bigger picture. So that's where I see Leo pointing out problems for education that teachers might be concerned with.
Thanks, Trevor. That's great um, integration and bringing a lot of things together that connects right with the book. I'm going to move right on to Margie Patrick. She's a professor of education at King's University in Edmonton, Alberta. She's studied how high school social science teachers discuss religion in the classroom. And she teaches a class, actually, this is very interesting, entitled Teaching in Religiously Diverse Classrooms. And that's primarily about public schools. Um, Margie Patrick also studies religious literacy, and she's thought quite deeply about this in league with the Center for Civic Religious Literacy, which is a Canadian organization. And as you can see in the chat, we've been putting some um, links up for you that relate to the work that some of the panelists are doing. So, Margie, why don't you tell us a little bit? You were involved earlier on in the book, we should probably admit, and saw a manuscript and maybe gave some feedback to Leo before it was published. So, you were somebody who knows the book quite well. Margie?
Well, thanks, Peter. And yeah, in preparation for this call, it was the first time that I got to see Leo face to face. So it was nice to put a face to this person that I'd been corresponding with now for several years. And I think my comments are going to just really pick up on some of the problems of secularism and how the privatization of religion just doesn't work in the real world. So picking up on that theme that Leo brought up, and just a couple of concrete examples from Alberta. And so the first one I'll do is 2021, the Alberta government released its social studies curriculum, K to 6, in the context of redoing all of its K to 6 curriculum. And for the first time, in as long as anybody can remember, they included religion in it, but which was great. I totally applauded that, but they did it in ways that were quite baffling, and there was no communication strategy, there's no education of the public in doing it. And so one of the baffling ways was this example for grade 2, 7-year-olds. One of the things that they asked students to do was to know what were the basic beliefs of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and then how those beliefs were present in Canadian society today, which basically sounds like a university course. But what was more interesting was the public response to including in any way religion in public curriculum. And the response certainly indicated religious illiteracy, which was, well, if I wanted my kid to learn anything about religion, I'd send them to the Catholic school. Okay, one reason for learning about religion is so that my kid would know what to run away from. No way should this ever be in the public school curriculum. It's all about irrationality and fairies. So there were all those kinds of responses. Religion is harmful. There was a very small minority of people that said yes, knowing about religion is part of being an educated citizen, but those were pretty small. And so that was the largest response to the curriculum. There were others too in terms of developmental age inappropriateness. And so the government did pull it back. It was the only subject area that the government pulled back. They re-released it in 2023 and cutting out all mentions of religion. The problem was, of course, that they did this and they wrote the curriculum without any input from teachers. And so in one conversation that we had about this, my comment was, if you only would have asked some teachers and people that know anything about religious literacy, we could have helped you and we could have saved you a whole lot of pain. But they didn't. I think my second example of where some of these problems of religious illiteracy kind of really impact students is I was doing my research with secondary social studies teachers, and what do they do with religion in the classroom? And this one teacher relayed the story to me of a local high school who had a culture day. You know, these happen regularly in high schools. And there were two Sikh students who came, and they had all the 5 symbols of Sikhism. And the principal sent them home saying, this is a culture day, not a religious day. And the teacher who was telling me this story was saying this with great approval of the principal who did that. And of course, we can never reduce religion to culture, but there are these iterative relationships, and of course, they influence each other. But this complete separation, right, that it is only in the private life that religion is allowed to flourish and to do anything. And I think the third example is something I do in my course, Teaching in Religiously Diverse Classrooms, is we look at some case studies, we look at what various religions say about the role of religion in one's life. And I mean, one of the things that we talk a lot about in that course is in preparing teachers to go and teach in really diverse classrooms is like, how can any of us say, oh, this part of my life is religious, and so this little part of my life that I can identify in some way, I can put aside when I go into public spaces. I mean, it's impossible. None of us can do that. How do we identify that part of life that is somehow religious? And so we talk about what does that mean for whatever subject area you're going to teach. There's lots of conversations we have about that, but there's lots of religious folks that certainly help us figure out what that might mean.
Thanks, Margie. We've been through the problems right now. I made a little list. The problem is the secular ideology, potential conflict with, controversial issues. The problem is going to be parents. The problem is poor curriculum, poor teachers, and poor principals, and poor students who don't understand religion well. So then I asked the panelists to talk now about what are the solutions. So back to Leo. Leo, in your book, what do you tell us needs to be done to get us beyond these problems? And is it all trade-offs? I think Brian's provoking us here. Is it always going to be a trade-off, or is there a better way?
All right. Well, it's a big question, and fortunately, I'm at an age and at a stage in my career, which is retirement, where I really don't have to think about too much about the implications of what I've said. So, but here's something. And Brian, I'd like to pick up on a couple of things, but I won't do that right now. Because you've raised some really interesting and provocative problems that have haunted me as I was writing this book. But ways forward, or what do I see as the way forward? I'm seeing some really interesting literature by people who think of themselves as religious, people who think of themselves as not religious, atheists, really challenging the model of secularism that we have come to think of as normative. And I think from a conceptual level, that has the possibility of opening up a more productive conversation. How to manage those conversations is another matter, but I think the category of religion needs to be decolonized, both from Christianity, so that we have an even playing field. That's the 1950 problem to which Brian was referring in Ontario, and Hindutva in India and other places. So decolonizing so that we create a more level playing field, or a more more possibilities for productive conversations. Um, but I'm seeing that. I'm thinking of Justine Ellis. I'm thinking of Liz Buchar, Anthony Pinn, a number of people who, um, they might not be religious, but they're really challenging. Tal al-Assad has done that, really challenging the concept of the secular and talking more about its productivity and saying it is also not religiously neutral. So I think that's a good place to start conceptually. And then, so that's where I'm living right now, is sort of on that conceptual level. Now, it's going to take institutions a while to catch up to that. And because, institutional patterns and privilege and so forth are built around a particular paradigm, a way of thinking about religion. But I think there are I'm seeing especially among some of the younger scholars, some very interesting conversations going on around the conceptual or theoretical issues around religion and secularism. That's all I'll say right now. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Leo. That's getting us into a better direction, perhaps. And Brian, I didn't say this about Brian Caruana, but yeah, he is one of the speakers here that wouldn't identify as a Christian, and that brings a lot more spice to our conversation. And I really appreciate you being here, Brian. Where does the religions geek point people when you write and when you talk about religious literacy through your own platform there?
Oh, am I next? I thought if you were doing the order reverse, Peter, on the second go. It's okay, but
I thought we were doing the same order and then
oh,
reversing at the end. So when we do our concluding remarks,
oh,
I'm going to
okay, okay.
reverse it so that Leo gets the last remark in our whole webinar.
Oh, okay, okay. Sometimes it's hard for me to keep up with people. Um, I don't know about solutions. Leo just used the word haunted, and I smiled inside when he said that because I thought, oh, welcome to that's my entire life about this issue is the sense of being haunted. Um, so let me raise some more, I guess, thoughts or challenges. And again, I want to say, Leo, I really enjoyed your book. I was writing furiously and thinking and talking to my wife and talking in the shower about it. It was really great. So I'm really grateful for that. Um, I loved your critiques of ideological secularism. Although I'm not religious, I share them. I know usually it's religionists that have that concern, but I have a lot of concerns about ideological secularism and the marginalization of religious people. I think what the flip side for me, and this is why I end up haunted, is I always end up caught, is it's not the only secular argument or approach. Sometimes today in the popular narratives, people forget that secularism was started by not by non-believers, but by believers who had encountered a problem, and the problem was religious pluralism. That pluralism looks quaint to us today. It was sects of Christianity, it was Anglicans and Presbyterians and Catholics. Watch the gloves come off, I guess. But at the time, these were serious differences. And yet they realized basically that they needed a shared basis for arguments and reasons, and that pointing to the Pope or something Calvin said or the Augsburg Confession wouldn't do. And so this is what I refer to as sort of modus vivendi secularism. It's not ideological, it's like a practical working compromise. Basically, we need the lowest common denominator we can agree on. And so, in this view, the reason you don't base laws on the Bible or the Quran in Canada, although you could legitimately do the former in Canada a century ago, and you can do the latter in modern Egypt, is not because they're wrong. It's because they don't have wide enough appeal as a basis for authority in the country. Non-religious reasoning isn't necessarily better, but it's something the Christian, the Muslim, and the non-believer, can agree on. Arguments like this hurts families or this undermines women are legitimate considerations for all of them in the way that someone saying this violates the Sunnah of Islam isn't. And so I'm always trying to think of that modus vivendi secularism because I think it's quite important. And the other issue for me, and I have more, I don't even have my own answers. I just have questions. Um, is I have wondered if modus vivendi secularism has to draw boundaries. At Ottawa, at the school you were at, there was a scholar that I'm sure you know of, but many other folks here may not, named Naomi Goldenberg. And Goldenberg had this really provocative theory that religions are what she calls vestigial states. That is, they're the vestige of a state, or what she calls once and future states. They used to be states till secularism pushed them aside, and they have the ambition, she argues, to be states again. Now, there might be smaller sects that never have the hope of aspiring to this. Um, but her claim is basically that religions at some level are ambitious, that they seek sovereignty, not only over private life, but over the public norms and over the public, over the public, essentially. And I found her article when I first read it very provocative, but over time I've come to think there's something to it. When religious movements come to dominate in states, there does seem to me, I hope I won't offend any of you, to be a pattern of the kind of modus vivendi protections for minorities, for free speech ebbing away. India is a great example of this right now, or Turkey or Indonesia. This is becoming more religious and things are getting worse for minorities and for gays. And there's Christian examples, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and there's some Pentecostal places that you can see this too. And so here I came to an uncomfortable possibility. I came in researching my own dissertation. I felt in my research that the story I'd been told, namely that secularism is religiously neutral, was bogus. But then I came to another conclusion I wasn't happy to come to, and that is that there are places where it has no choice. On gay marriage, I don't know what a neutral position is. It's legal or it's forbidden. I read your project as partly as an attempt to increase religion's voice in the public sphere. I get it. I'm sympathetic to it. I write articles arguing that religion belongs in the workplace, and I'm opposed to the Quebec government, for example. But at the same time, there's this other thing nagging at me that when I look at the major forms of government in my lifetime, say communism, religious states, and liberal democracy, none of them are perfect. But if you asked me which one I wanted to be a minority in, the first answer is none of them. It's never going to be a minority. But if I had to, I think being a devout religious conservative in a liberal democracy is better than being the wrong religion in a religionizing state like India or Indonesia, and certainly better than being in a communist state. If that's the case, then preserving a modus vivendi secularism might be something that has to sort of have a priority. And if religions are vestigial states, I struggle with the possibility that liberal democracy is sometimes unfair because it has to be. It has to, I think it aims to give some freedom, but it also has to contain its rival for sovereignty. It reminds me of Winston Churchill, and I'm twisting his words, but maybe liberal secularism, a modus vivendi secularism, is the worst possible system except for all the others. And if so, this may have implications for the place of religion in our public spaces, including our schools. And I also say this, I realize how self-serving of this for me it is for me to say this. And if it's right, I realize that it's for those of you who are religious, it's never going to feel very good. Thank you.
Wow, Brian, that's again provocative and wonderful for our conversation, and the kind of questions you're asking are the ones we need to listen to. And it gets me thinking about, non-religious post-secularism and forms of metamodernism that I've heard about, which is trying to juggle a bunch of different things at once. But anyways, I'm not a panelist, so let's move on to Traver. Traver, what would you like to add to this conversation about where we go from here?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So I'm going to bring it back to the what and the how that I talked about and thinking about the classroom again. So when we're talking about the what or the big picture, Leo gives us some alternatives because he says that when there's a confessional religion, or in the sense of you are participating in a particular community, so a school educating in a Muslim community or in a Christian community, that you are going to challenge the other big picture what's. And the one that I brought up was this putting in a high place of being an economic agent, or being a productive member of society in economic terms. When you have a different big picture, that causes a tension with that big picture that the state's putting out through its policy and the way that it teaches. And so then the question is, well, if you're not going to have that, what else are you going to have? And Leo provides us something else. And he uses some other specific Christian theological terms, but I found another place where it's articulated in more broad terms, where he says that care for the other is central and that trampling on the other amounts to a transgression. He says that immediate experience of the other is at the heart of learning religion in a way that is neither catechesis or the mere teaching of religious facts. Religious literacy occurs in relationships, in an environment of care and love. So Leo is providing an attempt at sort of decolonized, quoting another scholar, an attempt at a decolonized way of doing religion in schools, a religion that is focusing on what another faculty member at my institution calls connectivity, and he even cites this back to the Ontario policy on togetherness, saying, of course, that Leo doesn't disagree with togetherness, but how does it relate to this big picture that's pulling on our hearts towards a specific direction? And then, as a solution to this malaise or this feeling of meaninglessness, which Harvard psychologist Arthur Brooks also talks about in his new book on meaning, as something that he sees in his higher education students, this provides a bigger picture in which to locate oneself, but then when those tensions happen, to name perhaps what is causing those tensions. So this then gets back to, well, okay, well, Mr. Carlson, why do we have to learn about, Freitag's plot pyramid? And this has to go to do with what Leo calls wisdom. So first we've talked about the big picture questions occurring in relationship, that we are responding to people who call on us to love them. And we experience that connectedness as something bigger than ourselves. So now he connects education itself to wisdom. He says wisdom includes humility so that we do not turn our information and knowledge into self-serving weapons, the purpose of which is to present ourselves as more righteous and advanced than our grandparents. Education is animated by big, impossible ideas that make us and our world better than what we inherited. But it is also a process of expanding our hearts and equipping our bodies for the service of others, including those who cannot speak for themselves. So when we're learning these smaller bits of information, we're finding them in relation to this bigger picture. And when we can, for instance, look at plot within stories, it gives us something to name, to hang on to the world. And when we can see that thing in the world, we can see how it connects, for instance, in having a togetherness, in Canadian society, right? Giving ourselves stories and seeing stories that we play out and act with each other. Just to wrap this up, then the next question is, well, how does the teacher, doing a math assignment, how does that person, right, have a train toward the religious? And this is where I'd like to plug my institution's Free to Be Faithful, which is a opportunity to connect with people, but do these practices that give us the shapes that I was talking about with the shape and the block game, right? The shape to notice what is religious and what pulls in our hearts within society, to provide those things names, and to do things to bring life within our community. So I would highly suggest Googling Free to Be Faithful, and that should bring up those programs. But for the math assignment, I want to bring something up by the famous French thinker Simone Weil as a way to just end, because I think she has a beautiful quote about this. So she says, the love of our neighbor in all its fullness simply means being able to say to him, what are you going through? It is a recognition that the sufferer exists, not only as a unit in a collection or a specimen from the social category labeled unfortunate, but as a man, exactly like us, who was one day stamped with a special mark by affliction. For this reason, it is enough, but it is indispensable to know how to look at him in a certain way. This way of looking is first of all attentive. The soul empties itself of all its own contents in order to receive into itself the being that is looked at just as he is in all his truth. So when we get a problem wrong or we're struggling with it, we're learning to attend and to receive the truth. So when we slow down in our math assignments, that is a way of exercising this capacity to hear when somebody's asking us to love them. Thanks.
Thanks, Trevor. I think we're going to just move right to Margie, and then I'm going to open it up for questions to anyone. So have your questions ready, or you may put them in the chat if you prefer to do it that way. All right, Margie.
I come at this from a social studies educator, and I'm going to pick up on something that Leo said around some of these people that are revisioning religion and religious literacy, and to get past kind of the question is, what does it mean to be human? And, you know, liberalism is that we're first and primarily rational, right? And that we approach everything as a rational person. And what some of these new thinkers are saying is, you know, we're so much more impacted by the affective, by how we are shaped, by we engage the world by how we have been formed, and that we take that with us unconsciously into how we respond to events that are going on. And I think that that accounts a lot for the polarization that we have. And as a social studies educator, I spend one of my entire social studies curriculum and instruction courses in trying to prepare teachers to actually engage with controversial issues and current events in their classrooms. Because if they don't, and they don't model good thinking in the classroom, then this is as secondary teachers, then students go on the internet, they go into their, you know, their worlds, and they just hear the same thing. Plus, only certain views are heard. And so one of the things that we talk about a lot is that perhaps public spaces and public institutions should be perceived as plural rather than secular, so that we do come to them understanding that there's all kinds of worldviews and formations that are present here. And so how do we unpack them? And in that is the importance of narrative and stories, which is a huge part of the shaping. What are the narratives that shape? There is, I think it's McIntyre that says, don't ask me what I am able to do until you first ask me the stories that I'm a part of. Is that McIntyre, Trevor?
That sounds quite a bit like McIntyre.
Yeah. And so, you know, if we're going to get past this polarization, well, if we're going to engage with this polarization, if we're going to teach young people the skills and the actions of citizenship, to actually listen to each other and engage with viewpoints that are very different from theirs, if they are going to understand that sometimes people take the positions that they do because they're religious people, and they have certain assumptions about the world. They've been formed in certain ways that are perhaps different from mine, or they have secular assumptions that are different from mine. That are there ways that we can still learn to live together well? And so the two questions that I always ask is, what does it mean to be human, and how do we live together well across our differences? And is religious literacy in any way a part of how we can get to those questions in the face of all the polarization that we have?
Thanks for bringing up polarization. It is in the title of the talk for today, the last word, or one of the last words in the title of the talk. We were hoping that religious literacy would help with it and not hinder it. Let's talk a little bit more. I appreciate the anthropology question. And it's not just the rational liberal, alternative, but it's I shop, therefore I am, or I swipe, therefore I am, or I have screen, therefore I am. And that might be a common uh, let's say, context in which we all want to be critical. Anybody with a question for any of our panelists? Otherwise, I'm going to throw it back to Leo to respond to anything the panelists have said, but is there anybody in our audience today that would like to pick up on something they've heard or toss out a question?
Peter, there is a question in the chat.
Yes.
Oh, all right, from Gung Li. If religion is a term perceived as a sensitive topic by many, I wonder if worldview as an alternative. Yes, the worldview has been used a lot. Would any of our panelists like to talk about whether worldview is an alternative that will broaden the scope of what we're talking about and allow, other non-religious, in the sense of the typical world religions, to be discussed in the classroom?
Well, Leo addresses that in his book.
Yeah, can I just, I'll just say, can I just say a couple of things about that, Peter?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. I think when I talk about religion, I'm talking about something a little more integral to what I would say is anthropology or a human nature than worldview. So I think of worldview as something we construct. Religion is something we are. And I share a Christian faith, people around the world, but my worldviews are shaped by the fact that I'm white, male, Dutch immigrant, etc. Right? So my view of the world, in a way, it's been a worldview has been proposed as an alternative, but I don't think it's satisfying because I think it creates similar problems. Worldviews clash, right, over the use of oil or what we do with our forests and so forth. And also they don't get at that, what I would call that primitive or that basic component of who we are as people.
Anyone else want to comment on that further or ask another question?
Kind of hesitate to do this. This is Jim Decker. Um, I like what people are saying about what Leah was saying about uh, worldviews clashing, but how does that relate to religions clashing, um, which is kind of all the rage in so many places these days with fundamentalist governments? Is it necessary that or is it just something that happens that religions and worldviews happen to clash on sometimes very similar issues?
Uh, Peter, again, you'll have to control this, but can I respond to that?
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
I don't think religions clash. I think people clash.
Mhm.
And so people, Jim Beckford says in his 2003 book, religion doesn't do anything by itself. People do things with religion, right? And so any knowledge category can be weaponized. Um, and Elizabeth Hurd, Shackman Hurd, talks about how some of these conflicts that are identified as religious conflicts are actually overdetermined. I mean, there's a land use conflict involved. If you look at Nigeria, for example, or in what we call the wars of religion in Europe, there were nation states emerging and fighting over territory and so forth. And so I think the fact is, the unhappy fact in human history is that people clash, and they can do it over gender and language and whatever, right? So I'm not sure if I would want to identify any particular knowledge category as the source of conflict. It can be a vehicle, it can be a rationalization for conflict, but the fact is, people have conflict.
Religion is not unique in that sense.
Nope.
Hmm. Anyone else with a question or comment, or any of the panelists want to
Yeah,
jump in?
I could ask a question if there's time. Leo, Brian raised some points, especially in his first talk. He raised some points against what you were saying, and he did it in a very gentle and eloquent way. But I think he's questioning um, the claim that everyone's religious, and then probably in that you can't escape faith. And um, I think he was arguing more for the old concept of secularism that you're trying to get rid of. And I just wonder, and so I sort of agree with what Brian is saying, but I'm wondering if you would talk to that.
Sure. First of all, I think secularism, or not secularism, but the secular mindset was a real gift to European history. I think Brian talks about. Let me see. He has a technical term for that. Modus vivendi, secularism, and there are other people who have argued for that as well. So I'd like to have another conversation with Brian about this, and I'd be glad to buy you lunch, Brian, or whoever else wants to join. If there's more than one person, I won't pay. But I think we have the most opportunities for freedom and diversity when you have a paradigm crisis. So with the undermining or serious challenges to the domination of Christianity, you had the possibility of more diversity. And then what happens? We see it in Quebec. So the earlier forms of secularism in Quebec were more like modus vivendi secularism. And everybody just breathed a sigh of relief. What we're seeing now is a more ideological form of secularism. And so I think we have the. I'm not against the secular, and in that sense, but I think we should reframe what that means, and that is, can we limit the power of any one institution to impose itself on the world? So if you think about the power of the state. One of the reasons that people embraced states back in the 19th century was because it was such a relief to get out from under the church. So the state was seen as a secular or a non-church institution. Now we're in a situation where states have become kind of an end in themselves. I mean, we've seen the development of that, and so we're in a bit of a crisis, I think. And so ideological secularism is a little like that. So I think when we talk about education, one of the questions is what's education for and who owns it? So we can't separate the development of what we call public schools from the growth of the nation state and nationalism in the 19th century. That's simply our form of public schools came in as an arm of the state or a strategy of the state to create educated citizens. And I did more work on that with Edgerton Ryerson in Ontario. So I think there's some questions around this, but they're more around the issues of what's the proper and limited role of, for example, the state to create safe space for diversity, and what's the proper role of the church. So can you have one church? So Brian's comment that, I'm referring to Goldberg, of religion being ambitious. Peter Beyer says something like that too in his 2006 book. And I think that's obvious from history. There's this kind of creep that happens. And so I think that's not unique to religion. I think that's true of any institution that develops a privileged position and is seen as the antidote to what happened before it.
I wonder if Brian wants to jump in here since they're talking about what Brian said. And Brian, do you want to add anything to this? Is it true that what you were saying about religion is true about any institution or any ideology that gets a little high on itself?
Uh, yeah, what do I want to say? I don't know if I'm exactly answering the question, but let me share two things I guess I've been thinking in general, listening to the conversation. One is part of what I discerned from my dissertation, and again, it was like that realization of, boy, I don't like what I'm finding, is that at the end of the day, sovereignty will never be neutral. Something is sovereign. Some group, even democracy, we say democracy is fair. It feels a lot fairer if you're the majority. When you're the minority, it doesn't feel so fair. And it's the same thing with sovereignty. Something is going to dominate, and there's no neutrality. Abortion. What is a neutral position on abortion? Um, and I hated finding that. It was unsatisfying to my sense of justice and stuff. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's where I came down on. And this goes to what I was saying earlier is, it's Churchill, right? On democracy. It's the worst system except for all the others. And I have that about what I call modus vivendi secularism. And I agree, we have too much ideological secularism. Quebec is, and for France is actually the worst. Quebec's pretty
Mhm.
bad. When we get into English Canada, I thought Trudeau often was like just completely overstepping what I thought was appropriate, which I think a lot of religious people agree with me, but almost no secular people agree with me. But I thought he was overstepping. Um, but I think that sovereignty question looms large for me of there is no perfectly fair system, in my opinion. I lean towards modus vivendi secularism as the most generous to its losers, if I can call it that. Does that make sense? It might be wrong, but I hope what I'm saying at least makes logical sense. And the other thing I wanted to add is something else that Leo, that you talked about that I really feel deeply is this need for the education system to get at values and meaning. And I just want to offer for everyone out there, one other way to this is by the revival of the classic liberal education. There was a great podcast this weekend. I don't know if some of you know Ross Douthat, the Catholic
Mhm.
conservative commentator at the New York Times. He interviewed Jennifer Frey, who ran some kind of great books, liberal arts addendum to the program at the University of Tulsa. She had a bunch of mechanical engineers in it. It was a year they lived together in community, I think, on campus. And all of these engineers said it was unlike anything else they'd ever taken, and they loved it. And then, of course, the new president came in and canceled it because that's what happens in education today. Ben Sass, the dying Republican conservative, is talking about this as well, if you've heard of him. And I was briefly an advisor, and I'll shut up after this. I was briefly an advisor to a non-sectarian private school in Toronto, kind of, I think, grade 4 to grade 12. It was a boys' school, and they definitely dealt with values and meaning and big questions without being religious. The slogan of the school was "From boys of promise to men of character." And they were very into the question of values and meaning. But the thing about them or Jennifer Frey's thing, I'm sure religion comes up, but it's still it's more of a general liberal arts program. And so I just offer that as a there might be another way to still address big questions, and people will bring their religion to the table, but it wouldn't be explicitly, I guess, an examination of religious premises. So that's all.
All right, that's great. That's good stuff. We're having a good conversation here. I see we have some questions, and I'm going to put at least two of them together and ask our panelists, why don't we have compulsory religious education in Canada like they do in Botswana? And is AI able to help us do that kind of education? And we could say Alberta too. Why don't we have compulsory religious education in Alberta or Ontario? Because we have people from both places.
Well, I responded in the chat that there's lots of countries that do have a separate religious education course. I'm not so sure that's the way to go, because separating it out from everything else in the curriculum sends a message that somehow it's separate from biology and from chemistry and from social studies and history, and I'm not sure it is. I actually think that all teachers, regardless of what they teach, should have a course on whatever we call it, foundational beliefs or worldviews or whatever we are going to call it, and understand that what people believe impacts that discipline, and have those conversations in those disciplines, because it does impact everything. It isn't separated out from the rest of life.
All right, good answer. And is AI going to help us? Is the question we have from Alexander.
I can actually jump in on that because I've been doing some writing on AI and just this matter. I think, honestly, to me, the thing that's more concerning about and this is not to the person who asked the question personally, but I think in my own reflection, one of the concerning things I think is the conflation between AI and human capacity, right? And there's some people who do this from an upward level. And Emily Bender, who wrote a famous article on AI, mentions this in a different article, not the one that went really viral, but that, we can talk upwards, like, right, AI becomes human, right? So that's one way of talking about it. Another way of talking about it is that, maybe we can conflate being human with AI because we already view ourselves as machines, right? Like, maybe we've slotted into society in a way that values production so much that we can really only be machines. If you want to look into that more, Byung-Chul Han's book, The Burnout Society, gets into that in a pretty big way, even though it came out 10 years before ChatGPT. So then the solution in my mind is, right, well, what is religion and religious education in terms of the future with AI? And I want to, again, plug into Leo's way of thinking about religion, again, as this capacity to encounter these things that pull at us from beyond, right? And I would agree with Leo in the sense that I think rather than competition, that there's a relationality or things that hold us together that's at the core of that. And that goes with educational thinkers like Bell Hooks as well, who borrows from Thich Nhat Hanh's interbeing. So she talks about, and Leo talks about this as well. So perhaps I would just need to bring it in from Leo. I had the page bookmark, but I'm losing it. Anyways, that there's an inward healing. So there's inward healing of the world, and then there's an external healing of the world, right? So we connect and encounter, right? We sit in front of a tree, we sit in front of a river, right? We bring our neighbors, we sit next to the river, right? That a religious way of thinking, of looking at how things pull on us, can heal us inwardly and help us tell our stories and figure out how we fit into these bigger stories. And like Margie said, this really best happens in all avenues of life, right? Not as something that's to the side that we then sort of plug in. So then the question is, well, how do we learn with AI and become more human? Regardless of the question of ban, bracketing that, I think it's coming into reflection, and this gets again into what Leo's talking about with religion. So I think having this religious literacy that Leo talks about is actually the precise way forward. And there's a book called Teaching with AI that really drives in this point, that we need to have a pedagogy of process. And a pedagogy of process emphasizes process over production. And in process, we come together and we collaborate and we reflect together. And this, I think, trains that religious capacity for attention that allows us to listen to calls out for the love of the other. And that comes from the beyond human in terms of the world around us, as well as our fellow human beings. So I kind of sidestepped the question of, I think that does slot in well, AI's capacity within education. It can't replace being human if we have a strong definition of what it means to be human. And then I'll lead to your specific community as to whether you actually want to integrate it into your pedagogy or not.
All right, we said we'd go 75 minutes, and we're at that mark right now. I want to just put a quick plug in for the conference entitled Faith and AI that's going to be at Calvin University, and which is in a large part organized by my brother, Derek Sherman, who has a book coming out on this subject, probably within the next couple months. It's an edited volume that includes people like Andy Crouch, and I forget the other authors at this time. But anyways, I want to give our panelists a chance to give a last word, and I'm going to go in reverse order. And then at the end, I'm going to call this webinar over, but those who want to stay and talk are welcome to stay and talk, but it will be a formal end. So I'm going to start in reverse order. So that means we're going to Margie. What would you like to say to end the webinar, Margie?
I think Leo's focus on thinking well and using religious literacy to think well to kind of uncover current ideologies was helpful. It was a good way of framing this, and we need that in our current world.
Thank you. That's great. Trevor, do you have a last zinger for us?
Yeah, I just want to thank Leo for his tremendous work. I think it's a gift in terms of seeing how all life is religious and how every move we make and every interaction we have pulls on our heart from a place that comes from beyond and invites us, I think, to embrace, as he puts it in one place in his book. So thank you, Leo.
Brian.
Well, I just first wanted to thank Leo. I've never read something that challenges what I do so thoroughly. I thought I'd encountered all the secular and various sort of religious perspectives, and yours is just yeah, the level of your critique is really excellent. My own 2 cents, I guess I never got to the solution, was I believe in religious literacy. I would teach religious knowledge and knowledge of religions in schools in a way that I know Leo has criticisms of. And I would do what Margie said, which is, give case studies then of not just here's what they believe, but here's how it plays out in the world. And that would facilitate interesting discussions. But my feeling is you may have to, and I could be wrong, but you may have to shy away from getting into deep examination of the students' own views and religions because I think maybe we can't do that in a grade 10 classroom or something. And thank you again, Leo, and thank you, Peter, for this invitation.
Yeah, great to have you, Brian. I should add, True Confessions, Brian is also a friend here in town in Guelph. So it's been a pleasure to have you, Brian. Finally, the author himself, Leo van Arragon, what words do you want to leave the audience with? You spent a lot of time. This book is 335 pages long, and it is hot off the press. 2026 is what it says in the front, published by Stock, and available at any bookstore near you or online. Leo, what do you want to leave us with?
Well, a great discussion, and I got to keep thinking about and the fundamental questions around secularism and the role of religion. The actual application in classrooms, somebody else's problem. But the thing that is in the background for me is how do you manage diversity of any kind, gender, language, and so forth, in a jurisdiction that's fair and maintains some kind of social harmony. So religion is one of those categories. So really a deep thinking, and I got to go back and just think about some of that again. But I've kind of moved on to spirituality now and thinking about that as a kind of problem, because that's in the air too. So I want to thank Peter. I want to thank you for doing this. I'm not good at this myself, kind of publicizing. I did the work, I did the book, and then I thought, well, it's up to, whoever. It doesn't really matter to me that much anymore. But this has been great and really motivating. And so thank you for doing this. And thank you to Brian and Trevor and Margie for their thought and perspectives on this. It's really great. Yep.
Yeah, we're educators here, and we could talk about knowledge mobilization. I heard this word a couple years ago, and it means getting the stuff that you've studied and researched out so that it's actually applied. And
Yeah.
so we need a strategy for the knowledge mobilization of your book, so
Okay.
that it's not just Leo's passing thoughts printed by Whiffenstock, but that it provokes some discussions in schools and in public education corridors and makes hopefully some policy changes, which are really where the rubber will hit the road in the end. But Chong, if you could uh, press stop on the record button, and we will call this meeting to an end. I'd like to thank our audience for coming. This will be recorded or is recorded and will be posted. We'll also have a little article summarizing what took place tonight. But for those who would like to stick around and talk some more, I don't think Leo's in a rush.
No, I'm not.
So we're welcome to say to stick around and say more.